All right. What's going on, guys? So, today I'm going to try and walk us through this PowerPoint and do it so that you guys can see everything I'm doing and also see me, and I can kind of talk you through it. So I'm going to do my best, and we're going to go for it. So, here we go. Let's see. All right. So, talking you through movement. So, movement meaning exercise, activity, all that is involved in that. So just like I did last time, well, actually, I don't know if I had a sample for you guys last time, but what I've tried to do in each of these, part one, part two, and part three. Part one being exercise, or movement. Part two being nutrition, and part three being sort of the mental, psychological, community, spiritual, kind of the things that maybe we don't always associate with health, but have a large impact on it. I'm trying to give you a sample of something to do. So here's my sample. You guys can screenshot this or write this down. Feel free to pause this. It's a 10-minute workout. This is nothing crazy. You can do 8 to 10 reps of each of these exercises. So the push-up, the bent over Y, opposite side toe touch, box squat, dead bug, suitcase carry. You can find those on YouTube. You might be able to find them on my YouTube channel as well. I think I have almost all of those, if not all of those, up there. And yeah, so just wanted to give you guys a quick, example of how not only is this an example of a good, workout, but if you look on the left-hand side this is kind of how I put my workouts together. I usually have some sort of upper body push. So that's either kind of a chest focused exercise or a shoulder focused exercise. Upper body pull, where I'm pulling something to me. That might be a bicep curl. It might be a row. This is a bent over Y. So it's more pulling with my shoulders, my delts. A hinge. So where I'm moving primarily, you can interchange the word hinge with a hip dominant movement, where most of the movement is coming from my hips. So this is where I'm bending over at the waist to do an opposite side toe touch. That's a body weight exercise you can do. It's not going to move the needle a ton in terms of strength, but it's a great mobility exercise. Squat. So you can kind of interchange squat with a knee dominant movement here, where a lot of the motion's coming from the knees. Excuse me. And then core and carry. So core can be a variety of things. This is either going to be a twist or a this is an isometric here, or dead bug, not an isometric, excuse me. This is one where you're kind of resisting flexion and extension as you're going through them. So the idea is you're doing it slowly, so you're kind of resisting the pull of gravity as you're going through those motions. And then always have some sort of carry variation, which I think, especially for people in their 50s, 60s, and up, can be incredibly important because it's very functional. It has a lot of translation to the requirements of daily life. If you guys have any questions about that, shoot me a message. Happy to help there. So I'm just going to give us a quick reminder of progressive overloads. We talked about this last time. This is the concept, right? This is the concept that helps us make progress. Your workouts should get harder with time, right? So if I were to take myself this year at this very time and next year at this very time, it should be really challenging. It should be pretty challenging for me to get through the workout from next year at this time, because I should be able to make progress over time, even if it's just slow. It should be substantially different. And so the idea is, if a workout, if I get to the point where workout after workout, every workout feels easy, I'm no longer causing adaptation in my body. I may be maintaining, and you may be at the point where that's acceptable and that's okay. But for the most part, I find most people have not gotten to that point. They've not maximized their ability in terms of how flexible, how resilient is their spine? How resilient are their joints to, being put into deep ranges of motion under stress, under load? How much muscle mass do they have? Have they optimized that? Or have they optimized that in a way that doesn't overload them with, outside stress, or something we would call hermetic stress, kind of the different stressors in our body between our, social stressors and our work, our financial stress, our, the physical stress of a workout, all these things. You have to put enough on your body for it to actually adapt. So just gonna put that reminder in here. That is the principle we're following, especially when it comes to exercise. So getting into types of exercise, talking about cardiovascular training. So you're going to have a couple different kind of categories here for your cardiovascular training, or this is, what we refer to as cardio for short. You have your aerobic and your anaerobic. So all that means, aerobic just means it requires oxygen, versus anaerobic just means that it does not require oxygen in your tissues, in your muscles, for that to take place. And I say intervals, these not necessarily what you might think of as intervals. So when I say aerobic, this is, and I have LISS and LSD. And why would I have a psychedelic drug in here? No, that is long, slow distance, or low intensity steady state, is what those stand for. And hopefully, for these things, you can see, like, okay, for aerobic, this is something, it might vary, how long I'm going on here, but essentially, aerobic is anything that's going to happen that's over like 30 seconds. These are things that are happening in longer intervals, but can be essentially as long as you want. You can go up to, I've heard some crazy people go up to 24 hours or more for these ultra marathons, which I don't recommend. It's not particularly not particularly good for the body to go through that sort of stress, but it is interesting to see the adaptations that take place just with such a long event like that, and it can produce some interesting benefits to the body, but that we'll table that conversation for another. So aerobic, essentially anything from like 30 seconds to multiple hours is what we're classifying as that. Anaerobic is going to be something that requires your max effort, maximum intensity for less than 30 seconds. So the reason it doesn't require oxygen is because your body already has the energy available within its within the muscle tissues, within the the nerves and that sort of thing. And so it's not drawing on oxygen, it's not calling on oxygen to utilize and produce, and this energy, this ATP, or adenosine triphosphate, which is the molecule we use for energy, it's not utilizing that method of producing energy, and so it goes much quicker, but we also run through it much quicker because our body can only store but so much, and so then we run out of it. The recommendation for cardio, I'm not going to get into a whole lot of it right now. Whatever, in terms of how much you should do, really it's up to you. The recommended, kind of the minimum recommendations for are coming from moderate intensity for 90 minutes per week. So if you break that up, say you're going to the gym or going to do, you could twice a week for 45 minutes, or you could do 30 minutes a week or 30 minutes a day, 3 days a week. So the nice thing is, if you're somebody who you like your weekends, If you like your weekends and you want to do a 5-day-a-week program, you can do cardio and resistance training either at the same time, do an hour and a half a piece, or an hour a piece for 3 days a week. That gets you 30 minutes each. And then diving into the resistance training, you can break that up however you want to. But diving into resistance training, this is going to be, for most people, the biggest return on your time. Now, what I will say, cardiovascular training is going to improve something called your VO2 max, which is essentially your body's ability to utilize oxygen and deliver it to the places where it needs to go in order to exercise. That is the single biggest factor in health and longevity. So if you can look at one single factor and say, okay, how healthy is this person? The VO2 max is what we know has the best indication of when somebody, how healthy is somebody in general, how much can they go through, how are they going to age, etc. And so that is why cardio is so important, is because taking it to its ends in terms of, okay, I can do a lot, this low intensity steady state and just keep doing the same pace for a long time and make that time longer and longer and longer, or I can, do these intervals and really build that VO2 max that way as well. Because where you're going to see is your ability to produce oxygen and deliver it to the tissues with that VO2 max, which essentially just is a measure of your cardiovascular system, affects how quickly you recover for, those 30-second or less intervals. But back on resistance training, one of the things that I think is undervalued when it comes to resistance training is just how much it can help you in tolerating and reducing pain. And this is something I see time and time again with clients, even with people who've had chronic pain for 20, 30, 40 plus years, or even more, really. I've worked with a number of people now to realize that this is often the biggest single factor in changing that and reversing that for a lot of people. The key is figuring out a way to do it that doesn't aggravate pain, and sometimes that is more challenging than others. So, diving into important things to note about resistance training. So rest times, I recommend kind of 60 to 90 seconds in between sets. The more, the better. And if you're retired and you don't have, a really busy schedule, I recommend about 2 minutes. But that being said, you can make adjustments based on your schedule, based on how you're feeling that day. If you're feeling really good, you don't need quite as much. But this increased rest time, which I think for most people it is kind of an increase to take this amount in between the sets that you're performing. This allows us to produce more power per set, to utilize more force with our muscles. And so that's something that we want to make sure that we're doing and we're implementing into our exercises. So always make small adjustments, not big ones when you can. And what I mean by small adjustments is like, all right, I'm not going to go from, let's say I am lifting 20-pound dumbbells for a particular exercise. I'm not going to go from that. Excuse me. I'm not going to go from that to lifting 40-pound dumbbells for the same exercise, because that's a 100% increase. So I'd rather do like a 5 or a 10% increase if I can. So I might go from 20 to 22.5, right? Which is usually the increment that we have available to us, right? Or a 20 to a 25. So not only that, but also if you're, utilizing a program, you're being very strategic about it. One of the things you want to make sure you're doing, that I always tell people, is I do no more than 2 changes to a program at any given time, which essentially means in a given day, If I'm looking at, okay, how many exercises do I want to increase in weight? How many, exercises do I think I need to change? I always like to make small adjustments because you want to be flexible with things. If something aggravates you, whether that's you have an irritation, flare up of, inflammation or irritation somewhere, and you're not quite sure what it was, it's easy when it's just one or two things you change. Okay, let me take both of these out, see if it goes away. Okay, it did. Now I'm going to reintroduce one at a time to figure out what it might have been. And if neither make it come back, okay, great. You just went a little too early or for whatever reason, your body wasn't ready that day. Not a big deal. But this approach allows us to make those adjustments where now we can get into, okay, I'm going to do one thing at a time. I know what's going to cause a reaction, and I can make those adjustments as needed. So approach failure. Nothing should feel easy. So this one is really important. And it's something that really, it bothers me that this is not more talked about with this age group. I think part of it is that people are afraid of pushing people too hard, afraid of the potential consequences of that. But really, when we're working out, it's in such a controlled environment that, we have control over the weights. And as long as you're doing things in a cautious manner, this is how we should do it. Is when we get to that last, say we're doing 3 sets or 4 sets of our exercises in a day. When we get to the last, set or two, the few reps at the end should be really challenging. They should, you should have to brace, you should have to breathe properly, you should have to focus on your movement. There should be intention behind how you're moving, what you're doing, and really trying to recruit as many muscles as possible in order to get through the exercise. And the reason being is that approaching failure is what gets us to the point where we have enough overload and progressive overload enough that we're creating adaptation. If we don't get into this point of failure, or approaching failure, and failure essentially is what I mean by, just from a muscle perspective, I would not be able to go anymore. I cannot lift the bar. And this is where it's helpful to, be in a gym, helpful to work with a trainer, helpful to have a partner, where somebody can have eyes on you and you can ask for help with your last set. Most people are pretty good about doing that. I have found. Yeah. So we want to be approaching that point of, I don't have more reps in me, or I have very, very few left in me at the end of my workout. The rep ranges, what I like to say is 3 to 15. I've kind of changed this to be 3 to 20 on my, and you can go as low as 1. But with my approach to this group, beyond 20, it kind of, the point of the exercise is kind of lost. You're no longer really building size, often falling into this area of it gets really, really challenging to actually gauge how hard the exercise is beyond that 20 rep range, just because if you can go for 20, you can probably go for 25. If you can go for 25, you can probably go for 30, and so on. And you can kind of progress that out for quite a while. Obviously there comes a stopping point at some point, but this is just how I approach it. Is okay, the lower the reps, it should be more challenging. So if I do something where it's 3 reps, each rep should really, really, really challenge me. If I do something that's 15 or 20, I might choose that because maybe I'm not quite as confident in, that joint or that body part, or I've been building up endurance at this particular exercise in order to then increase the weight and drop back down to a lower rep range. So say, for example, I'm doing a bench press with a dumbbell bench press, and I want to increase that rep range in order to, build up in a safe way, improve my strength in that exercise and in my chest, which is, again, that's a great exercise. It covers a large muscle group and covers a large movement. And with the dumbbells, relatively safe. There's not a whole lot of ways that you can hurt yourself there, which is really, really nice because you can just drop the dumbbells on either side if things go poorly. That being said, what you can do, say you start out with 5 reps and you want to work your way up to 15, you can add as you feel capable. 1 week after the next, you can add 1 or 2 repetitions. And then when you hit that kind of 10, 15 range, if you feel confident enough, drop back down to 5 rep range and add, whatever the next increment of weight you want to go up to is. In terms of sets, usually no less than 3. Adjust the top set number to time and fatigue. So I say, okay, you can get stuff done with 2 sets. So say I do 2 sets of 10. I like to, do no less than 30 total repetitions. So that's kind of the way I do things. We talked a little bit about this. What is failure? It's when you can no longer perform the exercise as directed due to strength or endurance limitations of the muscle. For example, I could do 4 repetitions on my last set, but I failed on the 5th, meaning I didn't actually complete the 5th repetition because I failed. Now, we don't necessarily have to be failing our sets, and that's okay if you do, but we definitely want to be approaching that point. And that's how we make sure that things are, we're adapting and that sort of thing. Why does it matter? Oh, hang on. There we go. Why does it matter? Why does any of this, these strength exercises, why does it matter? So I ask about this is like, okay, why invest in a retirement account if your body is too weak to use it? So a lot of people, when they think of retirement, they often think of their finances. And of course, our world is certainly captured by money. And that's something that's very important to us and has to be, unfortunately. But many people neglect the physical aspect of retirement planning. You want to be able to move the same when you're 90 as you did when you're 40. And I say this is possible. It takes work, but it is possible. And it's what helps maintain independence in bathing, eating, using the restroom. If you're someone who, for whatever reason, loses the ability to move in different ways, you're gonna end up in a position where you are dependent on others for some of these basic things. And my goal is to help people resist this and help people stay independent for as long as possible. I think there comes a time at every person's life where they're going to be dependent on others for something, and this is where we want to kind of reduce the number of years that we are in that position. So most people are not well served by rest when pain is present, and this is the super, super common thing that I hear, especially from people when they go see their doctors, is, oh, well, if it hurts, don't do that. You should rest it and it'll get better. Or you should just stop doing whatever thing you were doing and it'll get better. But a lot of times the thing that we're told to stop doing is a thing that we do regularly. So for example, it's like, oh, you should stop gardening because that's a good idea, right? It's things like that no, a lot of times when pain is present, and I'll go ahead and say the exception. The exception is with, major fracture, dislocation. If those things have taken place, yes, you have to let a bone heal. you have to let a joint heal a little bit. The dislocation is less intense there. You can be served by less rest. Major fracture, absolutely, yes. You have to immobilize. You have to let the bone heal properly, and then you can go back into exercise, move. Because this is where I find a lot of times there's this bad cycle of, okay, something caused pain, whether that was actual physical damage may or may not have been there, or it might have been an emotional response to something that could have potentially caused pain. So fear of pain causing pain. There's all sorts of things that can cause pain, and I'll share with you guys at some point the just vast web of how our body perceives pain, and the number of things that influence it is incredible and complex and just immense in terms of if you're trying to evaluate what exactly caused pain. It's almost impossible to pinpoint. That being said, if you're somebody who you've lost range of motion in a joint, you've tried to protect it a little bit, your body, then maybe you haven't moved it as much as a result of kind of protecting against feeling that pain again. A lot of times it is exactly that. It's that rest that causes us to continue to lose mobility, continue to increase our pain response to being, moving through those ranges of motion that we need. And then your brain, being the efficient machine it is, says, oh, we don't need those nerves there. We don't need those neurons to work properly or to work efficiently. So I'm going to send oxygen elsewhere, and I'm not going to, supply that joint in this particular space with as much of the nutrients it needs to stay healthy. And so we actually forget literally how to, our brain forgets how to move properly sometimes. And so then we have to reteach it. And that can be painful. And a lot of times we have to work through that pain and get to a place where it's better. This last point here is a little, it might sound harsh, but most people die of being over fat or under muscled, and I see both all the time. And whether that's happening at 50 or happening at 100, that tends to be the case. There are very few people, I think, in this world who leave the world on their own terms, in terms of their physical health. And the thing that I have with that is that both of those are solvable problems. There are not problems that have to be, one way or the other. They are solvable problems. And so, it breaks my heart to see people who are in that position who are just simply don't know what their options are, and don't know what's best for them because, maybe the world has failed them. The industry that I'm in, or the healthcare industries have failed them. And so my goal is to make sure that everybody understands exactly how to solve these problems. And so, that's a little piece of my heart there. What if I'm too late? So this is something that I've talked with clients about. I've talked with lots of people about. I've had this conversation with my grandparents. If I have clients that are beyond the age of 80, making progress even after recovering from major stroke. Anything is possible. And so this is where I want to encourage you, with this example. A lot of people hear, oh, you lose muscle every year, you lose X percent of muscle every year, and I don't know what the exact percent is. Goes down year after year. And I think it's like after 35 for men and after 25 for women. In reality, that's only if we don't use it. And it's only if we've hit our personal ceiling, if we've optimized our muscle throughout our lifetime. So the example I like to use is Arnold Schwarzenegger. So if you know who he is, hopefully you do. He's, I think, 7-time Mr. Olympia, meaning, considered the best bodybuilder in the world, 7 years running. I don't know if those were entirely consecutive. I can't remember. But the point is, he's considered one of the best bodybuilders ever. And he has, at that point, reached the absolute maximum of how much muscle someone can physically build. He had great genetics, obviously. Also used, substances, performance enhancing substances, to increase his body's ability beyond its own natural ability to build muscle. And so for him, after he's out of his prime, he will lose muscle year over year because he's optimized that. But he will also maintain, and if you've seen him, you know this, he will maintain that muscle for a long, long time because he still exercises and trains incredibly hard. Like, I think if I went to try and do his workout, I would be huffing and puffing and maybe, puking in the trash can, just trying to keep up, because he's trained so hard to the point where even a light day for him would throw most of us for a loop. So that's something I want you to keep in mind is if you've not achieved your personal ceiling, if you're just now, at 60, 70, 80, getting into exercising and training, it doesn't mean that you're not going to see progress. You can still see progress. And I've had clients prove that to me year after year, month after month, all the time. Another thing I want people to understand is even lifelong disability does not disqualify you from getting results. I have multiple clients, and I'm thinking of 3 in particular, who are either clients or former clients, who spent at least 20, if not. So one of them spent 20 years, another spent 30 years. 40 years, and another spent 60 years believing in kind of the fact that their disability did not allow them to make progress in terms of their strength, in terms of their pain, in terms of their disability. So each one of these people are people who had diagnosed with some substantial disability, medical issue, and then within 12 weeks or less, working with me, particularly on reducing pain, then building strength, and kind of doing both at the same time. They, eyes are opened, and I just want to use that to encourage each of you to say, okay, I'm taking this thing that my doctor told me, and I'm using it as a way to excuse myself, even subconsciously, from doing the work that I will benefit most from. And that usually takes the form of strength training. I believe that's all I have for us for this particular class. So I'm going back through and just going through so this slide in particular, going back to, I'll sum up here. If you use this slide in congruence with the 10-minute workout the sample workout I gave at the beginning, that has the left side kind of categories for you. If you put any of those terms, the upper body push, upper body pull, hinge, squat, core, or carry exercise, if you put those into YouTube, you can find a wide variety of exercises that should give you, different things to choose from that suit both the equipment you have or, your particular limitations, depending on what you may or may not have going on. And I know we've got a couple of different things within our group that were mentioned, between knee and shoulder and potentially back issues. So yeah, that should, between using this slide and then using the slide on rest times, approaching failure, choosing a rep range, choosing sets, all of that should give you enough to start thinking about putting a workout together for yourself with, that key concept in mind of progressive overload. So meaning your workouts should get harder and you're going to want to do that time after time, just with a very slow and steady, keeping it slow, keeping it steady, but also changing one thing at a time, and making sure that these workouts are difficult enough to actually cause a change. I'm going to give you an example also of an example of an exercise routine that I immediately told somebody that it was not serving them well. So a lady at my church knew that I do this kind of work and reached out and asked me just to take a look at her. She had been prescribed or been diagnosed, with osteoporosis. And so I took a look at, her doctor's note with that and really just provided some feedback on her exercise routine. And she was telling me, oh yeah, I go to the gym, almost every other day. And, I go and I sit on the hip abduction machine where you separate your legs against resistance. And I do that for 80 reps. And that was it. And then she swims. Both of those are, good exercises, good forms of exercise. But like I said before, if someone's exceeding kind of that 20 to 25 rep range, your ability to judge how many, at what percentage am I working, at what intensity am I working, completely goes out the window after so many reps. And what that means is she's probably at doing 80 straight repetitions with no rest in between, no breakups to build, to build that intensity and refuel and refresh the muscles with fresh oxygen. There's very, very little that she can be getting out in terms of bone density, because with bone density, particularly, we go back to Wolff's Law, as I mentioned in the last class, Wolff's Law being the body adapts and lays down bone and muscle and other tissues, including joints, ligaments, and tendons, in proportion to the forces we place upon it. And if she's doing this exercise, the forces for her are not high enough because they're so low to allow her to be able to do 80 in a row, 80 of this repetitions of this exercise. So I told her, hey, look, try this, break it up into, anywhere from 4 to 8 sets of 10 to 20, depending on your 20 or 10, depending on how she wants to break that up. If she still wants to do 80, that's fine. That will allow her then to spend 2 minutes in between each set, 1 or 2 minutes in between each set, and push herself to a point where she's going to be able to get those forces high enough where her body will create a change. So that's an example I want to leave you guys with. Hopefully I covered a lot of your questions. I know there are probably questions that I've not answered. And like I said, I want to do a Q&A kind of sum up segment on this as well. So with that in mind, please write down what questions you have, email them to me, and I will get back with you as soon as I possibly can with that Q&A video answering those questions for the class. Thank you guys for being flexible with me today, and hope you guys got something good out of this one. We'll see you guys soon.